We have a special crossover event for you today. You're going to be hearing an episode of Designing Tomorrow. It's a show all about the social impact space, the strategy and marketing and branding and fundraising and executive level thinking behind what makes great social impact organizations. It's hosted by Eric Ressler. He is the founder and creative director of Cosmic, a brand strategy and design firm located right here in Santa Cruz. Eric sits down with Sarah Newkirk. She's the executive director of the Land Trust of Santa Cruz County. And the two of them dig into the inner workings of how Sarah thinks about delivering impact in our community. They dig into things like Measure Q and wildlife crossings and community engagement and a whole host of other things. It's a fascinating peek into how one of the titans of environmental solutions in our community really thinks about her work. So I hope you enjoy this episode of Designing Tomorrow on your Science Solutions Santa Cruz feed. I'm Jonathan Hicken. Enjoy.
I remember conversations at the Nature Conservancy. The CEO was going around the country asking various chapters, should we deal with this climate change thing? Yeah. Right? And it's laughable now, right? Because of course it is the thing that is actually sort of shaping all of our work. I think everybody thinks about conservation as this discrete thing that happens. You buy the land, you kind of put a fence around it, you stick a sign in, and it's done, it's conserved. Yeah. But it's not. Our job is to conserve land and then protect those wildlife values, those agricultural values, those public access values in perpetuity. And that's a super long time. To your question of how do we connect that to the national scene and the global scene, we need to lean into this kind of thing. We need to be talking about what we're doing here. And we need to be convincing people that life is good here because of these investments that we're making.
I'm Eric Ressler.
I'm Jonathan Hicken.
And this is Designing Tomorrow. Sarah Newkirk, welcome to Seymour Studios here.
Thank you.
So we are here for Designing Tomorrow, our show about social impact. And I'm really excited to dig in on all kinds of topics. A little bit of background for listeners who may not know you. You are the executive director of the Land Trust at Santa Cruz. And we worked together, full disclosure, on some branding work, and you came in as a new ED. And I'd actually like to start there. I'd like to hear your story and your trajectory coming in, having deep expertise and knowledge around conservation and environmentalism, and you can speak to some of the other experiences that you've had. But you came in as a new ED to an organization that had rich history, had a lot of community, had a lot of community equity and ownership involved in it. Walk me through what that experience was like.
Well, let's just say that I came in unprepared. I have a rich history of a rich background in conservation, but conservation practice. I'm, I guess, a leader of sorts in the sense of building teams to accomplish difficult work. But this was my first experience being a leader of a whole comprehensive organization, including the aspects of the organization that go far beyond conservation, including the fundraising aspects, administration and operational aspects, things like fleet management, right? You can't even begin to understand the range of things that an executive director of a nonprofit does until you become an executive director of a nonprofit. And when I came in, which was in August of 2021, the exact same day that Jonathan became the ED of the Seymour Center.
No way.
Exact same day. We celebrate our anniversary every year.
That's amazing.
And when I first came in, it was, we were actually in the middle, believe it or not, of a capital campaign. And that my predecessor's departure came, at the to some extent at the expense of that capital campaign, which was well underway. And as you know, capital campaigns are based on relationships and for the Land Trust, deep and authentic relationships. And there's no way to manufacture those.
Yeah.
So the first thing that I had to do was sort of get my fundraising legs under me. And I leveraged my friendships to do that. I leveraged my friendship with Jonathan. He helped me write an appeal letter when I didn't find myself with the staff necessary to do it. And so, it was definitely a trial by fire coming into that leadership position. But I will say that I was supported by some exceptional staff and some exceptional board members. Yeah, I came in unprepared, but I feel very well prepared now. 5 years out, I feel as though I have a pretty clear sense of what I'm doing.
Yeah.
I always say that program staff get to be the new guy for about a year, but EDs get to be the new guy for about 5 years.
I love that. So I've actually joked with Jonathan before on the show that I feel like a new ED has roughly like a 3-year window to really put a stake in the ground and like prove themselves, so to speak. That's a weird way of saying it, but that I think when a new ED comes in, there's usually some kind of expectation that there's going to be some change in the air, right? And I think there is this kind of window of opportunity that if you don't make some of your biggest moves in those first 3 years, that's a somewhat arbitrary number, but I'm going to stick with it. You kind of lose your ability to do so. Again, not like a strict rule, but I'd be curious to hear, like, did you think about that coming in, that tension, that balance between wanting to respect what was there and the way things were done, but also knowing that you have your own vision, you have your own set of opinions, priorities, theory of change? Like, how did you balance all of that?
That is absolutely true. And I would add, maybe for later, that I also think that EDs have an expiration date, right? That there is a period of time in which you're going to be effective at making change, doing good conservation or whatever the issue is that the organization's built around. And then you probably lose your luster after a little while. And I don't know what that period is for me.
Yeah.
But I think you're absolutely right that you have a honeymoon period where, you're this new shiny object that the board has recruited and they're really proud of.
Yeah.
And they're willing to give you a really long lead. And yes, we took advantage of that, and not in a bad way, but we stepped into the opportunity to make big changes, to do things like establish a new strategic plan. We're working toward the end of a 5-year strategic plan that we kicked off in 2022 that brought in entirely new aspects of conservation work that the Land Trust had never really done before, including coastal climate adaptation. Our Beach Ranch project is really the first of its kind sea level rise adaptation project, where we're taking marginal flood-prone farmland out of production in order to accommodate the sort of natural progression of marshland landward as the sea level rises. And doing that also protects farming in the community as well. That was new stuff. And when we first started talking about doing land deals, and when I say land deals, you have to understand that buying a 250-acre farm on the coast of Monterey Bay is a $15 million enterprise, right? So I'm not selling a small thing.
Yeah, right.
It's a big thing that we're doing. And so, that kind of long lead is absolutely essential. We built that strategy into our strategic plan, but not before we had started to sort of socialize it internally. Another thing is the branding work that we did with you guys. The Land Trust had been represented by pretty much the same collateral since its inception, which was in 1978.
Wow.
And it was lovely, but it was dated. And we felt that the organization had really sort of turned a corner and was ready to step out into the world as a newer sort of modern enterprise that's doing really cutting edge conservation.
Yeah.
And part of the sort of new perspective that I brought to the Land Trust is owning what it already was, which was a conservation incubator. The Land Trust has been, for its entire almost 50-year life, been doing really innovative conservation work that other land trusts don't do, whether it is building trails near farmland, having farmland next to wetlands, whether doing this wetland regression project like we're doing in Beach Ranch, and the wildlife crossing on Highway 17. Really one of the first of its kind in the state of California. And now Caltrans is replicating that business model in other places to provide for wildlife connectivity around the state.
Could you briefly, just for our listeners who might not be familiar with that project, give the 2-minute elevator pitch of what that crossing actually is and why it matters?
The wildlife crossing across Highway 17 was built in direct response to wildlife mortality at that exact location on Highway 17. We worked with scientists to find the place where wildlife were experiencing the greatest impact from colliding with vehicles, on the assumption that that's also a place where people are experiencing the most impact from colliding with wildlife. And so we had to buy land on both sides, or buy an interest in land on both sides of the highway, in order to even get Caltrans started on the process of figuring out how we were going to permit, construct, and operate the wildlife crossing. But since there have been hundreds of crossings of deer, crossings of mountain lions, crossings of bobcats, and lots of gray foxes. Go to our website at landtrustsantacruz.org and look at the wildlife videos. I know the eagle cams are cool, but the fox videos of those guys transiting, they actually go under there and they play. There are deer that go under there and they take a nap.
Yeah.
It's just a fantastic amenity for our community, and an amenity that our community contributed to. One of the tools that we used to pay for the wildlife crossing was the first Measure D, which was a transportation bond measure for Santa Cruz County, and that really helped spur the fundraising around that wildlife crossing.
So I'd like to hold on that a little bit and talk about how you guys think about different levers for creating change, because working with you and watching your org since working with you, I think that's one of the things that stuck with me is you guys, you say you're an incubator, an innovation incubator, I think is the term you used, right? And what I've noticed is that you've used various methodologies for creating change, whether those are legal interventions or political interventions like passing Measure D, which gave us a bunch of state funding, or was it state funding that kind of came
Measure
in and matched?
D was local funding.
It was all local funding. That's right. So tell me, like, when you're thinking about enabling or enacting your strategic plan, how do you look at all those different tools, those different levers, and choose, like, these are the ones we're going to use, these are the ones we're best fit for? Walk me through your thought process in doing that.
Well, so the land trust model is fundamentally about one tool, and that is real estate.
Yeah.
Back in the 40s and 50s, when there wasn't such a thing as a land trust, it was the Nature Conservancy, actually, that sort of originated this idea of, let's not do the controversial legal stuff. Let's not sue anybody. Let's not do advocacy. Let us do the thing that is going to be uncontroversial and that is going to protect the resource in the place that it needs to be protected the most, and that is to purchase real estate. And for years, TNC was receiving gifts of like backyards in Connecticut, used to be the joke.
Yeah.
And the Land Trust of Santa Cruz County also had a similar period of time where what we were doing was basically taking donations. That was what we could afford, was free real estate.
Free real estate. That's not a bad deal here.
We still own some of those donations, and we kind of wish we didn't own some of those. But that's what young organizations tend to have to do.
Right.
As we've grown and our ability to raise money has increased, we've been able to prioritize real estate that would really serve the resource best. That's conservation planning, and there's a whole group of scientists and practitioners that are specialists in this. But the Land Trust was one of the conveners of the groups that wrote the conservation blueprint for Santa Cruz County, and that was written in 2012. It's still the seminal document that we all use for thinking about conservation. It doesn't contain all of the things, and when we have to do things like sea level rise adaptation, that document didn't really consider, we have to do sort of an additional plan. But that's still a foundational document for doing conservation. But when you get to the point about other tools, Eric, I think that we prioritize using tools that will set us up for our other tool better, right? So obviously we need to raise money to buy land. We also grow relationships in order to buy land, whether it's with a landowner or with a partner or with an elected official that can help direct funding to a project. Those relationships are critically important. And then the other question is, what do we do with the land once we have it? And that, I think, gets to the long tail of conservation. I think everybody thinks about conservation as this discrete thing that happens. You buy the land, you kind of put a fence around it, you stick a sign in, and it's done. It's conserved.
Yeah.
But it's not. Our job is to conserve land and then protect those wildlife values, those agricultural values, those public access values in perpetuity. And that's a super long time. It's an obligation that we take really seriously. It's a very long-term, noble occupation, the stewardship of land and the stewardship of conservation values. It's expensive, and so we have to raise more money for stewardship. It requires people, and so we have to either have people on staff that can do it, or we have to work with partners that can do it. And we do. We work very closely with organizations like the Watsonville Wetlands Watch, the Resources Conservation District of Santa Cruz County, even the Prescribed Burn Association, all of these partners that can really help us maximize the conservation value of a property.
I'd be curious to hear your take on kind of the state of play of the broader conservation movement right now, because my sense working with you and observing your work and just paying attention in general is that there's been some pretty major shifts in how the sector at large thinks about conservation. I think specifically about this kind of like glass dome protect versus access and deeper meaning between the community and the community's land and wildlife. Like what's your point of view on all of that at this stage right now?
It's a super good question. And it has evolved. And I'm fortunate to be old enough to sort of remember how it was done in the early 2000s. And it was very much, I mean, I remember conversations at the Nature Conservancy when we were asking ourselves, and the CEO was going around the country asking various chapters, should we deal with this climate change thing, right? And it's laughable now, right? Because of course it is the thing that is actually sort of shaping all of our work.
Right.
But what you're asking about is something a little bit different. And it's the sort of the role of people and the community in the conservation enterprise. And, you know, the Land Trust of Santa Cruz County is fairly unique among conservation groups in California, in that we serve three specific conservation beneficiaries. One is wildlife and natural resources. The second is agriculture, right? That our community in Santa Cruz County has a very robust, very progressive agricultural industry. And when I say agriculture, I mean ranching, I mean forestry, I mean row crop agriculture. So our working lands community are big partners. But our third beneficiary is people, right? And so public access is expressly built into our mission.
Yeah.
Even if it wasn't expressly built into our mission, giving people access to beautiful land and nature is the most mind-opening thing you can possibly imagine. And so if you want to inspire future conservationists, you bring kids out to nature. If you want to inspire gifts to conservation enterprises, you bring donors out to nature. There is nothing more sort of motivating than actually being out there and feeling it and just being quiet for a second and listening to the sounds, feeling the air, you know, and every piece of property is different. It almost has like a terroir, almost the experience of being at a conservation property. And we're so fortunate to be able to have such interesting places to bring people to. And your listeners should be encouraged to go and become members of the Land Trust. It costs $5. You can give whatever you want, but you don't have to give much. And then you can be invited to all of these extraordinary opportunities to experience these extraordinary places. We have public offerings too, but the members get a lot of special treatment.
Well, and if you're listening from anywhere in the world, a trip to Santa Cruz is never a bad idea.
It's a great idea.
I think that's something that in our community here in Santa Cruz, there seems to be a nearly universal appreciation, care, ethos around nature. And I think that it takes a certain type of person to want to live here, or if you were born here, to figure out how to get creative enough to afford to stay and live here. And I think that everyone has, and this is a little bit of a generalization, but most people have some kind of connection to nature, whether that it's because you're a surfer, or because you're a mountain biker, or because you're a hiker, or because you're an equestrian, or because you just like being surrounded by all of this. And I think at the same time, there's that local perspective that people here have, that I have, even though I'm not originally from Santa Cruz. And then I see these like national, international, and global conversations around climate that feel so detached from that experience, where nature is a resource to be extracted, or nature is a thing that isn't as relevant in our fully digital world. And so to your point about getting people into nature is how we create current donors, future conservationists, and even just like a reconnection between like our humanity and the environment that we all are in, as much as we try and kind of remove ourselves from it. To me, it's the most important thing to focus on right now. And I think that there's all kinds of research that I'm sure you're even more familiar than I am around, that like the experience of being in nature, the awe that you experience literally changes your brain waves, literally changes your physiology. And I think anyone who's had experiences like that, it's self-evident, right? You don't need to be put in an MRI machine to know that that's true. So I guess my question after all of this is like, how do we connect local conservation and local and individual natural experiences all the way up to global climate change, when a lot of that's our decisions being made by global and international climate policy from decision makers that feel like they might as well be as far removed from any individual as possible. I don't have any access to the UN. On behalf of my clients, I do to some degree, but there's that sense of just, what can I do, right? Like as a everyday citizen, an individual who cares passionately about this.
While it's a troubling time to be a person in the world right now, it's not a troubling time to be a person in Santa Cruz County right now. Yeah. It's also not a troubling time to be a person in California right now. We live in a community that is really willing, has an appetite for innovation and really for pushing the boundaries of what's possible on climate action. We live in a state that puts its money where its mouth is.
Yeah.
In 2024, California passed the Prop 4, the big $10 billion climate bond. And that bond is now generating revenue for conservation organizations like ours to do the work that we do. There's no place else in the world that supports conservation to the extent that California does. Santa Cruz County in 2024 passed Measure Q, which is the water and fire resilience property tax measure that is generating $7 million a year for public agencies, for nonprofits, for the grant program, so that we can all do work that makes our community more resilient to climate change. So I have a lot of reason to hope. You know, to your question of how do we connect that to the national scene and the global scene, we need to lean into this kind of thing. We need to be talking about what we're doing here, and we need to be convincing people that life is good here because of these investments that we're making.
You know, if you haven't visited the Seymour Marine Discovery Center at UC Santa Cruz in a while, or ever, you really should come visit us. We are right on the bluffs of the beautiful Monterey Bay, with an aquarium full of local species and a bunch of hands-on science exhibits that help you understand what's happening in our ocean and along our coast. We are connecting the incredible research happening at UC Santa Cruz with real-world solutions for our coastal community. We don't want science to just sit on a shelf. We want it to shape decisions, inspire kids, and help our community feel equipped to act. So So if you care about the future of our ocean and our coastal community, or you just want to experience a place that makes you feel a little more connected to it, come visit us at the Seymour Marine Discovery Center. Science Solutions, Santa Cruz.
I love that where you took that. And we've been talking about this with various guests, and Jonathan and I have been talking about it in various episodes as well, that in the climate advocacy space, especially around climate change, there's been so much messaging around the potential downsides, and now we're getting to the point where it's the realized downsides, right?
Yep.
Coastal erosion, rising sea levels, communities being impacted like today. And there's been very little discussion and narrative change and visioning around what could be instead. Not we need to do this or else, but here's what this could look like if we did it this way.
Yeah.
And I think that's a real shame, because I think that is actually more motivating for an issue like climate action. There are some issues where that painting a picture about the downsides makes a lot of sense. Maybe to a degree, public health is a space where that sometimes works, like disease prevention, although that doesn't seem to be working so well either right now. But I think for an issue like this, where it's so easy to tip into apathy, right? Where it's just like, well, I can't do anything. The metaphor I've used for this before is it feels sometimes like you're an ant trying to push a glacier for an issue of this size. And I think if instead there was here's what the world could look like, here's what our community could look like if we were to make these changes, if we were to make these investments instead, my sense is that would be a much more generative, constructive, inspirational, creative act. So why isn't that happening?
I think people get trapped by the sort of this has never been done mindset. And that leads to the it can never be done mindset. And, I prefer to ask the question of what would have to be true. When we first started talking about Measure Q, it was one of my trustees came to me on my first day on the job and said, you know what you need to do? You need to do a local conservation, measure. And I said, okay, because I was too stupid to know
how hard that was going to be.
How hard that was going to be. But, and so of course we had years of conversations about it. And mostly the conversations that I was having with stakeholders were conversations about how it couldn't, that's been tried before. It's been tried 2 or 3 times before, and we think that it can't be done. It's never going to happen here. And so, I had to have sort of a come to Jesus moment with my board where I said, I'm just not sure about this, but let's brainstorm, because I think that if the following things were true, we might be able to succeed, right? If we were able to get a simple majority threshold for victory, we might succeed. If we were able to sort of couch this in terms of the natural world and risk reduction, right? Climate risk reduction, nature protection and climate risk reduction are fundamentally the same thing, or can be accomplished using many of the same tools.
Right.
And if we're able to convey that message to the public, they might support something that they might otherwise not support. And so we did this exercise. What would have to be true in order to succeed, rather than why has this not succeeded? And we answered those questions, and we took care of those relationships. Because some of the things that needed to be true were that we needed a robust coalition. We needed the Farm Bureau on our side, and they were.
Yeah.
We needed a lot of landowners on our side. We needed all of the supervisors on our side, and we got them. And so we made a list of what had to be true, and we made those things true.
I just want to underline that strategy to our listeners right now, because I feel like we do something similar when we're doing visioning exercises on behalf of our clients, but I think it's such a powerful framework, because sometimes going from where you are and who you are as an organization to who you're becoming, you see where you want to go and you see where you are, and that gap just looks like it might as well just be the Grand Canyon, right? But if you start to break it down into I'm going to use your words here, what would have to be true for us to be able to get there, you start to tease out the mini steps that get you closer and closer and closer, which can help you figure out, is this viable at all, right? Do we think we can get 7 out of 10 of these, or at whatever the threshold might be to get it over the finish line? Do we need to get all 10? So I want to just underline that as like a brilliant leadership and strategy framework in terms of like feasibility of a major initiative, or even just like how to break big, ambitious problems down into their pieces to be more effective in general. So just want to underline that. And then I also want to point out that you talk about this kind of like coalition that you had to build, right? All of these people that you had to get on your side. And I'd love to just give you a chance to talk about, you've mentioned this a couple times in the interview already, relationship building. You talked about it through the lens of fundraising. Now you're talking about it through the lens of essentially advocacy or politics at a local level. Whose responsibility is that in an organization like yours? Is it the whole org? Is it the ED? How do you think about breaking that down into like pragmatic steps that you take?
What an interesting question. In our organization, relationships are held by different departments. I think that we have relationships that are primarily about engaging with the public. And we have an engagement department that holds those relationships. We have relationships that are primarily about sort of external or government affairs, and we have a department that does that. We have relationships with landowners, and our land protection department does that. We have relationships with scientists and other sort of practitioner partners, and we have a department of conservation strategy and planning. But I think that the importance of relationships and the foundational power that it gives an organization to have productive relationships in which each partner is experiencing significant benefit, right? Those are the really useful, productive relationships.
The win-win relationships.
The win-win relationships, exactly. It's not transactional in the sense of like, I'm winning, you're winning, and we're all winning.
Right.
It is truly an authentic relationship because the sort of foundational question is, can what I do as my business model serve you in some way? And for landowners, often what they're experiencing is a crisis of capital. Yeah. And so what we do in purchasing a conservation easement can really help them. We had a land deal recently with the Estrada family that has this large historic ranch. And there were a number of different sort of family members that owned different portions of the ranch. And what needed to happen was it needed to be brought together under the unified ownership of the next generation that was going to operate the ranch. But what they really needed was some funding to operate it, right? Yeah. And so we were able to come in and purchase a conservation easement that protected the land from development in perpetuity, but also put it in the hands of some very, very capable and progressive land stewards that are doing an immaculate job of caring for it. And we don't have to do that, right? And so that took a years-long process of building a relationship. What's wonderful is that now we have that relationship and we have those partners that are able to speak to their community on our behalf. And you don't get that unless the relationship is really sort of a productive, mutually beneficial, but also authentic and not strictly transactional relationship.
I want to spend a little time talking about the relationship with the public that you mentioned, because to me that feels like something I wouldn't necessarily expect with a land trust. And maybe you tell me, is this a unique flavor of land trust that you are that does this? But I could imagine a version of you where this is all behind the scenes policy wonk work and like real estate work, and the public doesn't really need to know you exist. You're just going to do good work behind the scenes for them. But you guys have taken a very different stance where you're a very well-known, almost household name in our community, a beloved brand. And we experienced this in doing the rebrand, just like how much equity and care people had for the land trust as an organization, as a brand. Why do you think it is that you've set it up that way? Is that intentional? Is that just culturally something you inherited? Why does the public need to know who the land trust is?
The public doesn't need to know, but they would get substantial joy from knowing and being engaged with us, because what we have to offer is incomparably beautiful and incomparably valuable. And just as you said, Eric, earlier in the interview, people in Santa Cruz County, on the whole, are here on purpose.
Yeah.
And the main purpose that they're here for is being able to connect with some component of the natural world, whether it's the forests, the trails, the surf break, whatever. You know, if you're not out surfing, you're at the downtown farmers market buying your strawberries for the week. People are here on purpose to take advantage of the resources that this incredible county has to provide. And so I think that people should know about the land trust, because we are their representative in making sure that those resources that this county has, that makes it so incredible, is able to stay around for the long term and provide, you know, all the joy, all the nutrition, all the mental and physical health that comes with being outside, for generations to come. That is, in fact, our mission. The other thing is that I work with the most incredible staff. We have a staff of about 32 people. They're mostly about 20 years younger than me, and they are having such an amazing time. I strongly encourage anyone who wants to sort of learn more about the atmosphere of our enterprise to visit our downtown office at 911 Center Street and just come and talk. Come and see what we're up to. Come and look at the map of our properties. Come and talk to some of our conservation practitioners and hear what work we're doing in order to conserve and give access to the public for all of these values that we're protecting. My team is part of what makes the land trust, and it's part of what makes Santa Cruz, Santa Cruz. And I think that interacting with the public is something that brings me great joy. It brings my team great joy. And it really is part of the recipe for an organization that can create major conservation impact.
So one of the questions that we often ask when we're doing case for support work for major donors is, what would happen if your organization were to disappear? And I actually kind of want to flip that, and I want to press on this one more time, because I think I'd love you to connect the dots for our listeners. What would happen to the land trust and your impact if your public stakeholders were to disappear? And I want to ask that through the lens of a little bit of a belief that I have, which is that too many climate action and conservation organizations don't consider the general public a major stakeholder, especially if they're grass tops, especially if they're global advocacy. And there's this kind of like, well, these decisions get made behind closed doors, so no one really needs to know who we are. And I don't believe that that's true. So I'd like for you to tell me your authentic answer, whether you agree or disagree with my point of view there. How would your work change if the general public here in Santa Cruz County and beyond were not a major stakeholder in the work that you're doing?
We would probably still have some lands, right? I think we would probably primarily be working with conservation easements where we were, able to buy, cheap and incomplete. And there's nothing wrong with easements. Sometimes an easement is the right tool for the job.
Right.
But we would be probably limited to those kinds of conservation agreements because we wouldn't be able to afford much else, and because we wouldn't be able to generate a lot of interest or excitement in doing a full fee transaction. And I say that because, again, it's these relationships within the community that are generating landowner interest, that let people know that there is an option for their property other than selling it to a developer. I think that if the public were not there, a big component of the vision that we have for this county, which is of a thriving, economically viable, recreationally active population that supports conservation because it's in their sort of enlightened best interest,
Yeah.
if you will. And so I think that it would be, we would probably still exist. We would be less successful, and we would be fundamentally less joyful. And I think that the sort of dissemination of hope that the Land Trust's work brings to the community would also be kind of absent. And I think, Eric, that's the real story, and that's what the other levels of organization of this country and the globe need to hear, is that when you provide this kind of conservation work, this kind of climate adaptation work to the broader public, the public loves it, and therefore they love you. And that is, I think, again, a beautiful, virtuous cycle.
I love that the answer is joy, right? And I think we need a lot more joy in how this work happens. And to your point, that's already going on right now. So Sarah, before we wrap up, this was so great. Thank you so much. I'd love for you to just have a chance to plug anything and everything you'd like. How can people get involved who are here in Santa Cruz County or in California? And how can listeners who are elsewhere in the US or the world who are listening, what would your advice to them be if they're interested in conservation and wanting to get involved in their local communities?
Well, I encourage all of our local listeners to join up. Yes. We have a community. It's an exciting community. We do all of these events where we're bringing folks out onto the land to really experience lands that not everybody really gets to connect with. And so go to our website, sign up and become a member. It doesn't cost very much at all, but obviously we'll be happy to receive any contribution that folks want to offer. So for people that are outside of our community, take a look at what we're doing. Take a look at what we're up to. Our website has dozens of videos of showing our work in action. There are lots of articles showing our work in action.
You have your own podcast.
We have our own podcast, the Learning the Land podcast, and that it really sort of elaborates on the programmatic work that we're doing and the values that it's bringing and protecting for our community. And then tell your own local land trusts the story of the Land Trust of Santa Cruz County, Conservation Incubator, coming up with new ideas, figuring out what would have to be true and making it happen, because it's not impossible. There are just obstacles. And then let us know what you find out. I would love for it to be sort of an exchange of information, and I would love for our listeners elsewhere in the world and in the country to be able to bring this back home.
Absolutely. So join up if you're local, or if you're not. If you are a generous donor and want to see your money go somewhere that's going to make a real impact here in Santa Cruz, you would be at the top of my list personally. Sarah, this has been wonderful. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Thanks, Eric. I appreciate the opportunity.
All right, that does it for the special crossover edition featuring Designing Tomorrow. Thanks to Eric Ressler for hosting, and thanks to Sarah Newkirk for coming in. Thanks to both of you for recording this great episode right here in Seymour Studios. Thank you to the entire team at Cosmic for your incredible strategy and design work for our social impact sector, and to everybody at the Land Trust of Santa Cruz County for the incredible work you're doing right here in our community. Thank you to Edith Belmont for editing. Thank you to Lisa Benson for production, to Carrie Goodbar for production, to Valerie Situ for distribution and socials. Thank you for listening. We will be right back in for our normal Wednesday drop, so I will see you tomorrow.